Hi, I'm Mike Hanberger with TurkeyFast Studios. Today I'm going to show you about the interaction system in Cat RPG Builder. By the end of this video, you should be able to set up interactions and attach them to characters and objects in your games and allow the player to interact with them. Now, I have this empty scene here. It has a player and some geometry, but nothing else. So the first thing we're going to need to do is add the interaction service to the scene. So we already have a conductor set up with some services. All we have to do is go under New, Services, and then Interaction Service. And as you can see, there's one option under the interaction service for the default selection prefab. And I've already created one of those. We can add that in now. Oops. We'll go over that in a second as to what that does. But that's effectively, if you are to interact with an object and there's multiple interactions available, it'll pop up this UI and allow the player to select which interaction they want. Next thing we want to do is create a thing to interact with. So let's add a cube and find out where that cube went. There it is. Let's put the cube pretty much in front of our player here. Alright. So, now we're going to need to add an interaction manager to the cube. And we can do that via add component here. Add the interaction manager. So on the interaction manager, there's several options. Just to go through them quickly, you can override that selection prefab that I mentioned by dragging another one in here. You can show or not show this interaction selection prefab. If you choose not to show it, then the topmost interaction will be chosen by default. You can also turn interaction via mouse on and off, so that means whether you can click on it to interact. And then there's an option here for interacting when you push the mouse button down versus when it comes up. And then UI interaction type, that's for the mouse button click, whether you can click on it through the UI or not. Typically you want this not over UI. And then maximum mouse interact distance, so that's the maximum distance you can interact with it via the mouse. So, after we've done this, we want to create some interactions. So let's create a first interaction here. Now there's several different types of interactions. We're only going to talk about the base one, which is just the regular interaction. So these other ones deal with other systems like the dialogue system, combat, and the ability system. But for now, let's just create an interaction that's not involved with any other game system. So let's call this the destroy interaction. Now, you can set up some animation and some sound here for when the interaction is triggered. We're not going to do that. We are going to add, you can add actions and conditions underneath this, and we're going to add an action here. So we're going to just add the destroy object action and set it to owner, which it's already set to. So now if we were to add some conditions in here, they would determine whether the interaction was available or not. So we could say you can only interact with this if you have a specific item, or if you've been on a quest, or whatever, depending on what condition we added. And also you can see we have an evaluation requirement here. That's for the conditions. So right now it's set, so any one condition that we put under here would have to be true in order for this to work. So now you'll notice this takes an interaction type. So interaction types are attached to the interaction service. And let's create one now. So let's call this destroy type. So the reason why these are on the service is because they can be used to either be triggered via a button or triggered via a UI button. This way, if you have like a console game or some other game where you have a joystick controller, you can have interactions triggered like when you get close to a thing, you can press a button to interact with it. So we need to call this something, so we're going to call this destroy. And we could set a sprite if we wanted to have an icon for it. And then we can add a button name here, which we're going to add as jump. And we could set a UI button target, so if we wanted something on the UI to be able to trigger this, we're not going to do that right now. So if you look, there's a target selection method, which is how it determines if you hit this jump button which target to select if there's multiple interactable things, and this is set to the closest within a radius in 3D, and we'll set this radius to 5. You could also set a layer mask there. Alright, so what we should be able to do now is hit play. Look at our cube here. If we get close enough, if I just click on it, that interaction goes off and it's destroyed. In order to hook up the button here, we're going to have to make sure that this destroy interaction has an interaction type. So we'll just drag over our destroy type, and we're good to go. So now let's try again. And since jump is already hooked up to the player jumping, I'm going to jump, and you'll see the player jump, and then you'll also see this object get destroyed. There you go. So now let's see what happens if we add a second interaction. We'll call this push. And underneath here, we're going to add a translate action. Duration of 0.25, move it 1 unit in Z, and that sounds good. So let's also create the interaction type for that. So I'm going to go cat RPG interaction type. We'll call this push type, and then we'll label that push. We'll give that a button of fire 3, which is shift by default. We'll set our radius here to 5, and then we need to come over here and set our interaction type on that, and we should be good to go. Now, if we walk over to this thing and we hit shift, it moves. And if we hit spacebar, it disappears. Now, previously when we clicked on it, it would automatically just disappear because there was only one interaction. But now there's 2 interactions. And we have it set to open up the interaction window. So, and we did set the interaction window. So if we click on this, we'll see that we have the 2 options here. We can push, or we can click again, and we can destroy. Now, let's see how that actually works in practice. So let's drag this interaction selector in here. So it is a state machine, but the only reason why it's a state machine is so that it can have this face target on it. That way, if the UI is always facing the target. But it does have this other data binding thing, which is a UI interaction layout group data bind. So it's similar to a regular layout group data bind, except for by default it just lists out the interactions. And we've given it a list prefab, so it's going through each interaction and instantiating a version of this list prefab, adding it to this vertical layout group. Let's add a thing under here. So so it's going to instantiate one of these for each interaction, and this just has a button in it. Now, one thing to note is that this button is a state machine, and it also has a data bind base. The data bind base is to pass the data binding through to the next level, so that in our text object here, we can have a UI text data bind, and we're pointing to the interaction type and the label. So we're bound. This thing is going to be bound to an interaction. So we want to point to the interaction type that's associated with it, and then its label. And you can tell that you wanted the label because if you look in here, this is the label variable. So this button has, like I said, a state machine on it, and then the state machine has a button trigger. And underneath the button trigger, there's two other actions. So when you click on the button, it calls an interact action on owner. And the interaction type is owner interaction type. Now, you'll note that for both of these, I've specified to use the binding. That's because otherwise we'd be targeting the button. So we want to target the interaction instead. And then we have a hide interaction selection window. This one I am actually targeting the button, and it finds the window from there. So that's how this all works together. Let's take one last look here. So we can hit shift to move it. We can click and move it. We could hit spacebar to destroy it. Or we can come back and hit the destroy button. So in this video, you should have learned how to set up interactions, the interaction manager and the interaction service, as well as attach a interaction selection UI, and you should have learned how interactions can be created and how they work in general. I hope you found this video informative and useful. Let us know in the comments if there are other videos or tutorials you'd like to see. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on social media for the latest videos and other news. For more information on Cat or Cat RPG Builder and how they can help you build and prototype RPGs faster, please visit catgamebuilder.com. I'm Mike Handberger with Tricky Fast Studios. Thanks for watching.